Welcome to the Life Poetic with Thomas Keily, your weekly knowledge drop of wordcraft and invocation. This week we're looking at the work of Irish writer John O Donohue. John O Donohue was an Irish philosopher and poet and is most famous for his book Anam Cara, which means soul friend in Gaelic. Anam Cara is a beautiful collection of folk Celtic spirituality, and he looks at the modern world and modern philosophy through this folk Celtic lens. And it's rich and full of beautiful gems of wisdom and insight. But the one that I wanted to talk about today, the one that I really connected with, is this line here, which is, "A poet is someone who is dedicated to the threshold where silence becomes language." I really love this line. As a writer, I really feel like that's what the creative process is about. First, it's sort of about the fallibility of language and the sort of the imperfect nature of language. And so particularly as a poet, when you're talking about the rich emotional world within you, or the way that you see the world working, or the way that you feel your relationship to spirit, words are a really blunt and coarse instrument to try and describe the depth of experience. But there is this point that language, as you start working with it, you can get more and more precise. And I guess particularly in English, where we have such a huge vocabulary to draw from compared to some other languages, you can really start working with nuance. And it feels like you start to get, as you develop your craft, you start to get closer and closer to what is this fundamental truth. And for me, that feels like we're moving towards this threshold of where the pure essence of what you're trying to describe meets your ability to describe it. And this is that threshold. And so what's beautiful, I think, with what John O Donohue says here is that threshold, beyond that threshold, into the realm of pure essence and the purity of what you're trying to describe, that's silence. And at that point is where the great nothingness transforms into the material world and steps into the material world and becomes expression. And the closer you get to that threshold, the closer you get to that point where pure expression becomes manifest expression, the better you are as a poet and as a writer, and the closer you get to truth. And I feel like this principle, I was talking with my friend Peter, who's a musician, and he feels like this applies to music just as much as it does to poetry. So I'd say a musician is someone who is dedicated to that threshold where silence becomes music. And I feel like it's a great philosophy to live by, whatever your endeavor, whether you're a poet or a musician or anything, even a lover. Say a lover is someone who is dedicated to the threshold where silence becomes love. And so whatever you're doing, to try and always get as close as you can to the essence, to submit and become dedicated and disciplined to capturing the really pure expression. And that involves going really deep and really still, and aligning yourself with silence and aligning your inner world with the great silence. And so I think it could be a really beautiful philosophy to live by. So that's all I wanted to say from this week's Life Poetic, something to live by as a poet. A poet is someone who is dedicated to the threshold where silence becomes language. This has been the Life Poetic with Thomas Keily. See you next week.